Good afternoon, everyone. It's the Spartan coming at you. It's day 464 of Vladimir Putin's illegal war against Ukraine. With the pending mechanized counteroffensive expected to start shortly, I wanted to go on record and basically state my opinion, guess, etc., on how I think the next phase of the counteroffensive is going to progress. The reason why I say the next phase is, in my honest opinion, this counteroffensive, which some people call the spring counteroffensive, etc., this counteroffensive officially started on the day that President Zelensky met with his generals, and they decided that they were going to hold on to and fight for Bakhmut as long as possible. That was the day that they decided that they were going to draw Russian forces into a meat grinder. They were going to pull in the best that the Russians had to offer: the VDV, Spetsnaz, the Kadyrovites, Prigozhin, his prisoners, Wagner, anybody and everybody that they could. They were going to pull in to that 25 square kilometer hellhole, and they were going to grind them down. And why did they decide to do that? Not because of the fact that, as we've all heard, that Bakhmut was particularly strategic at the outset, but because of the fact that the Russians wanted it, that Putin wanted it, that they wanted a victory. They needed a city, they needed a landmark, they needed something to plant a flag into. And because the Ukrainians knew that they wanted it, they knew that they had a chance to bleed them dry and slowly but surely give up, block by block, street by street, building by building, and take the best of the best that the Russians had left in their arsenal and tire them out, wear them out, just basically grind them down. Because that's the one way that you could get them to poke their heads out of trenches and come forward at you. If the Ukrainians had withdrawn from Bakhmut, like a lot of people wanted them to do, and protected their forces and had pulled back to some new lines, the Russians and the Wagnerites and the prisoners and etc., they would not have lost anywhere close to the amount of men and material that they lost. They would have moved forward, they would have taken relatively untouched buildings, they would have taken over old Ukrainian trenches, and they would have planned their next two cities that they were going to attack. But because of the fact that the Ukrainians held their ground, kept the highway of life open, and pulled in every viable asset that the Russians had to throw in the fight, they basically ground them down and wore them down while they were building up all of their men, material, training, ammunition, etc. for the upcoming next phase. So that, in my opinion, a bit of a diatribe, but that, in my opinion, is when the actual offensive started. So you can call it a spring offensive, because from that point on, it has all been shaping, positioning, making the battlefield an attractive target for the Ukrainian forces, moving the Russians where they wanted to move them, either forwards or backwards, out of the range of Storm Shadow, into the range of some other assets or ammunition, etc. So, where are they going to attack next? If we look on the map, let's eliminate a couple of things right off the bat. Are they going to go through Moldova, Transnistria specifically, and take on the 1,500 Russians that are there and take the juicy little ammo dump that's in there and then somehow work their way around? No, they're not going to. 100% sure. Moldova is off the table. Let's get rid of all the other obvious ones as well. Are they going to be going through Poland, for example? Are they going to work their way around? Is Poland going to give them a free pass down highways, etc., and sneak around the back door? No, they're not going to be doing that. They're going to be staying exactly. They're going to. The Poles are going to be staying exactly where they are, which is out of the fight. And the Ukrainians are not going to be going through Poland. They're not going to be going through Slovakia. So those are all the least likely, 100% sure, not going to attack options for the Ukrainians. As we work around the clockwise, things become more, at least, interesting or possible, if not unlikely. Next up is Belarus. Now, Uncle Luca would love for everybody to believe him that the Ukrainians have this grand scheme to enter into Belarus, basically go back through Chernobyl in reverse, attack Belarus, make them feel uber important, etc. That is not going to happen. Belarus is strategically unimportant for the Ukrainians. It would give them a second front of fighting. It would make enemies of the Belarusian soldiers who are currently, at least by all accounts, neutral and happy to be out of it, if not leaning towards Ukrainians. By all accounts, there are nuclear weapons currently on or going to be on Belarusian soil, etc. So Belarus is out of the equation as far as potential attack vectors. Next up would be this line between the Belarus-Russian-Ukrainian border, and we'll call it the first occupied territories down here north of Lysychansk. Would it make sense for the Ukrainians, not the Russian freedom movement, not the Russian volunteers who are doing some excellent work at the moment, but with the Ukrainian military, official Ukrainian military, would it make sense for them to attack somewhere between here and here? The answer is no, for several reasons. The main one being Vladimir Putin has time and again, and the Russian, I believe it's constitution, or at least the Russian rules of engagement state that they will not use nuclear weapons unless somebody threatens the motherland, the Rhineland, etc. The one excuse that you don't want to give Vladimir Putin is to actually put Ukrainian soldiers, the Ukrainian military, onto Russian soil and give him at least that opportunity, that reason to escalate to chemical, biological, nuclear. So that basically wipes out any opportunity or any thinking, any chance that the Ukrainian army is going to be coming up this way and attacking Russian proper, even if it meant doing what the Russian Legion and the Russian Volunteer Force are doing, which is creating havoc in the back, basically the back lines, the border, the unprotected areas that everybody thought were protected. Okay, whoops. So that takes us to the more likely opportunities for the Ukrainians to attack. Now, the one I want to get out of the way right off the bat is the one that everybody seems to be talking about, from military, ex-military, experts, YouTubers, etc. Everybody believes it's apparently the worst kept secret in the world that the Ukrainian armed forces are going to be coming down here in this section, in this Zaporizhia Oblast. Somewhere along this line. That's where everybody says it is a 100% going to happen. Now, while I can't say for sure that it's not going to happen, I can't say for sure that that's not going to be one of the places that they're going to attack. I would also like to say that, I would also like to ask everyone the question, which is, when have the Ukrainians ever done anything that everyone has expected them to do? First of all, everybody expected the Ukrainians to fold within from 3 days to 2 weeks after the invasion started, and obviously they didn't. The masses believe that Kharkiv, which was surrounded for a minute, was going to fold, and become Russian-occupied territory. It wasn't. The Ukrainians made everybody and their mother believe that they were going to be attacking Kherson over here when it was occupied, to the point where they let their forces be seen, where they fired all kinds of rockets, ammunition, mortar, etc. at the Russians that were located across the Dnipro. And then they went so far as to issue a public service announcement to any citizens to please vacate the area because an attack is basically imminent. They made it so painfully obvious that they were going to be attacking Kherson that the Russians began to, let's see if I can get this palette to work right. Nah, it's still the same color. Anyways, the Russians began to pull forces from Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia Oblast, etc., Kharkiv, everywhere, and bring them all the way down to go mano a mano and fight the Ukrainians. And in fact, they went so far as to bring them across the bridges. If you remember, all the bridges and dams were still intact. So they basically took every spare force that they had and they put them on trains and buses and horseback, whatever, and they brought them down and they planted them in the Kherson Oblast, including across the river, and basically said, let's do this. And as soon as the Ukrainians had shaped the battlefield as much as they wanted, what did they do? They attacked in the Kharkiv Oblast and took back tens of thousands of square kilometers. This used to be Russian-occupied territory, and the Ukrainians took it all back. And then the Russians started to shift forces back, and the Ukrainians then started to pockmark all the bridges and dams and crossings across the Dnipro and trapped this group of men over here. And everybody thought, oh, the Ukrainians are going to jump across the river behind them, or they're going to attack them head on and basically drive them out and capture them, whatever. And they did exactly the opposite of what everybody expected yet again. All they did was show patience and blew apart every crossing, every piece of equipment they could with HIMARS and Excaliburs, etc., to the point where the Russians now said, we're evacuating civilians, and they weren't actually evacuating just civilians. They were evacuating the military personnel. They put them in civilian clothes, they put them on civilian buses, and they got them the hell across that river. So once again, the Ukrainians fooled everybody, including the Russians, and got exactly what they wanted out of the battlefield, which was a vacated Kherson Oblast, or at least a Kherson city on that side of the Dnipro. Minimal losses on their part. Demoralized Russians leaving in civilian clothes on basically Greyhound buses across the river. And then they weren't done. After that came Soledar and Bakhmut. Soledar, they fought the good fight. It was not a very defensive. It was not as defensible as Bakhmut, but they did a good job. They slowly but surely gave up ground, and then came Bakhmut. And Bakhmut, they fought tooth and nail, and then it became that cauldron. The cauldron where it looked like almost like a jellyfish, and the Ukrainians were inside it, and there was basically a couple of kilometers of land with barely passable roads in muddy terrain to exit. And everybody thought they're either going to get surrounded or they're going to turn tail and evacuate from Bakhmut immediately and basically give up that ground. And what did they do? They hung on to it. They hung on to it, and they fought, and they ground them down, and they ground them down, and they ground them down, and they gave up a block a day, sometimes no land whatsoever in a day, but always kind of on their back foot, blowing up buildings that were usable as they went, using their night vision and thermals, picking apart the Russians, bit by bit by bit by bit. And people kept screaming for them, evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. And they just basically slowly but surely gave a little bit of ground, And then lo and behold, they decided that they were going to widen out the area around the Highway of Life. And they did that with their own special forces. And they started chipping away at the edges and the flanks. And there used to be a crab shaped, like crab claw shaped encirclement around Bakhmut. I'm probably not going to do it justice, but say it was something like this. I'm going to be way off on the map, but anyways, right? And the Ukrainians attacked the crab claws there and there and there and knocked it all the way back, at the same time slowly but surely giving ground inside the city proper. And so once again, proving my point that the Ukrainians basically do the exact opposite of what everybody has thought they would do, and they are successful at it. Now, that's not to say that they're not going to do a double negative on us, use reverse logic on us, and finally do something that everybody expects. But what I will say first of all is looking up here around Severodonetsk, basically in these two areas, the problem with performing an attack up here is two or threefold. First of all, if you were to attack, let's say, let's just pick a line. Just say they're basically gonna come in off these two crab claws like that. These little bump outs, right? Let's say they do the same sort of thing that they did around Bakhmut, and they come in from that side, and they basically do a pincer move, and they cut off a whole bunch of troops in here and get some equipment and that sort of thing. Well, the one problem with that is, even if you have overwhelming force, and they will, they're supposed to have 9 to 11 brigades. If you're hearing they have 9 to 11 brigades, trust that they have 14. And nobody knows the makeup of those brigades, and we'll know them after. We'll know the makeup after the fact of where the Strykers, where the CV90s, where the Bradleys, how are they dispersed? Are the Bradleys with new tanks or old tanks, or is there, like a Challenger leading two T-55 Tardis tanks or whatever? We won't know those makeups, but let's just say overwhelming force. You make a pincer move here, and let's say you even possibly get all the way to the border. If you were to get all the way to the border here, say 4 brigades. Well, 2 brigades you would think would be watching the north, and 2 brigades would be watching the south. And not to say that the Russians have a lot of available troops in reserve. They're not holding on to that miracle army that's going to come save the day. But at the same time, you potentially, for these two brigades that are right here, right? You're going to have potentially Russians that can attack from that side, from this side at least, right? So call it 3 lines of engagement that you're going to have to worry about as you work your way up. And they very well could mow through all of those people. Whatever equipment's there, by all accounts, it's very sparsely occupied with troops and equipment up in these areas. At the same time, say there's another 2 brigades in this particular vector of attack, and they're going to start moving down this way. They are moving against some of the air quote strongest fortifications, Dragon's Teeth, trenches, etc., and some of the more heavily populated military units of the Russians and Wagner and Kadyrovites, etc., that are down here. Let's just clean this up. So these 2 brigades, 2 plus, we'll call it 2 brigades, moving down this way, are going to have to contend with most likely a pretty substantial pushback of all of the forces that I just mentioned, like that. And on the flip side, they potentially have to watch their back door, to watch their Russian troops could potentially be coming from anywhere along these fronts. The further down they move, the more open their backside becomes. And the current forces that you have in these trenches and frontline positions here for the Ukrainians, you would say to yourself, oh, that's no problem. They're just going to all move all the way across and take up position on the Russian border and stop anybody sneaking around behind. Easier said than done. You need transportation. First of all, these people probably aren't the most energetic bunch, as they've been entrenched and in country and fighting forever. But let's just say that they're all freshly rotated in, that sort of stuff. You're still going to need to get them across an active battlefield and to take up position on the other side in an area that is most likely completely undeveloped. There's going to be no trenches, no fortifications. You don't know the land, you aren't familiar with the land. Some of this land, like this area here, has been in possession of the Russians and the separatists, etc., since 2014. Right? So they know the land better than you. So that kind of paints a picture of why attacking anywhere, I would say, from here to up there, I would say these are interesting. I would say the Ukrainians will take what is given to them, but I would say that this is not the most likely for their main thrust, unless it collapses like Kharkiv collapsed last time. If the Ukrainians for sure are going to keep 20 to 30% of their troops back, and they're going to be looking for an opportunity that comes out of the blue. A line collapses, entire units, entire BTGs, not that there's really BTGs anymore, but huge formations of Russians just basically turn tail, drop their equipment, whatever, and head for the border. The Ukrainians' trust are going to have reserve units stationed all across the battlefield, ready to pounce on any blue sky break, where basically things just open up and it's too good to be true and you can't let it go. Okay? But assuming that doesn't happen, do I think that Zaluzhny and Zelensky and everybody else are pinning their hopes on taking on the strongest troops head on, strength versus strength, which is going to cause the most attrition of your forces, which is going to cause the most equipment losses, and is is going to produce the least amount of results in the shortest period of time. Yes, if you crush strength with strength, eventually, if you're willing to lose the men and willing to lose the equipment, the Russians cannot match you as far as training and modern equipment and fresh troops and all that sort of stuff, and you eventually win, but you will lose way too many troops for what I think is an unnecessary tactic. So moving down to where everybody feels, and like everybody feels and states firmly that the attack is coming. It's basically between what I would say here and here. And we'll go like this, in this area. This is where retired generals, current generals, everybody online is basically saying, this is the Holy Grail, this is the way to go. The Russians know that. The Ukrainians know that the Russians know that. Everybody knows, it's the worst kept secret, that this is potentially a sweet spot. Because of that, the Russians, first of all, have some of their best, air quote, best troops on these front lines. The 122nd, whatever's left of them around Vuhledar is still there. I don't know if they have any equipment left, but those guys are still there. And there are 3 to 4 layers of trenches and Dragon's Teeth and fortifications and minefields, etc. And it's also the shortest distance to what is actually the Holy Grail, which is the water, right? This distance right here and this distance right here through Melitopol to that waterway, basically those are 2 very, very short tracts of land. And once you achieve one or both of those, you do automatically cut off what's always been called the land bridge from Russia all the way through to Crimea, across the Kerch and back. The problem with that, again, is that everybody expects it to happen, and if you're going to look at the mindset of the Russian or the Ukrainian military up until now, they have basically led everybody, including the press, including online mill bloggers, etc., they've led everybody to believe they knew what was going to happen, and they've done the opposite. Before I kind of get to where I think the surprise is going to happen, I will say that the Ukrainians are doing exactly what they did before. They're not saying evacuate Melitopol, they're not saying evacuate Mariupol or Vuhledar or anything else, but they are hammering the heck out of every single base, fuel depot. There are storm shadow hits all over the place, air assets, oil and gas, troop concentrations. The Azovstal steel plant, Karma is a you-know-what. Apparently a couple hundred troops decided to set up shop in the Azovstal steel plant, and the Ukrainians waited for that to happen, and apparently within 24 hours of them unpacking their bags, they dropped at least one storm shadow straight on top of their heads. So if you're the Russians and you're looking at it going, okay, so where are they shaping the battlefield? Well, they're shaping the battlefield all in here. They're grinding everybody down. Where I don't hear as much happening is over here. It's not to say it's not, and I always hate to say that there's nothing going on the battlefield, because that's an insult to anybody that's on those front lines. There are always drones and snipers and shelling and intelligence gathering and electronic warfare and and special forces, etc. But this is getting all the noise. This is getting all the It's basically got the light shining on it the brightest, and this to me is the dimmest over here. There is next to no talk about it. And one thing that's killed me, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, not to say that I know more than anybody else, but I've heard so many people including some people that have a lot of respect for their opinion, just offhandedly say, well, the Ukrainians will never attack over here because there's the Dnipro. It's a river, right? So they're not going to attack there. And I can't believe they're saying those words when for the last 15 months, the Ukrainian military has basically seemed like they're half human and half otters. They've crossed every single waterway anytime, day or night, that they've wanted to. They've transported hundreds, if not thousands of people across waterways that people thought was impossible. They've done it in broad daylight. They've done it in the dead of the night. They did it when it was expected that they were going to do it. They did it when it was unexpected they were going to do it, either in retreat or in attack. The Russians have lost thousands and thousands of people and hundreds of pieces of equipment, from bridge laying to tanks to BMPs to BTRs to etc., trying to either attack or retreat across various waterways. Where the Ukrainians, it's like it's their second nature. It's almost like they live in a country that's full of waterways and they know how to do it. Oh wait, they do, and they are, and they can. So to me, to offhandedly say that this area here is just a no-go and is not going to happen is very interesting. It's very, very interesting. Because when I look at the way the Ukrainian military shapes a battlefield, they almost shape it in reverse of what you would think. They will show their cards to get you to fold. They will attack with HIMARS and Storm Shadow and Excaliburs and Harm 88s, etc., in an area and tell the people to vacate an area like this. Not that they've told these people to vacate, but and put all the focus on this, and then lo and behold, they come around the back door. I'm not saying they're going to do that for sure, but if I was a betting man, if someone said, what is going to happen, you need to predict exactly what's going to happen with this next phase of the counteroffensive that's been ongoing since the defense of Bakhmut. I would say, personally, that the Ukrainians are going to divide their forces into roughly, we'll call it 5 groups of 20% each, something like that. 20%, let's just say right off the bat, 20% is going to be held in reserve, sprinkled out throughout the battlefield, ready to either help someone who's struggling, who's had a lot more pushback, who's had some failures, whatever, or to pounce on some opportunities where the Russians have collapsed unexpectedly. The Russian sidebar, the Russian military and the Russian defense right now, to me, is like an uncooked egg. It's got a very rigid outer shell. If you push on the two ends, if you push on the strong parts, it'll push back and it'll hold. If you push on the weak parts, it'll collapse and it'll all collapse and you'll get to the gooey center. And I honestly think that's what this whole front line is right now. I think it is one big, long eggshell with a gooey center behind it. People talk about the trench lines that are 3 and 4 kilometers back and 5 kilometers back, and the ones that are in Crimea, etc. Those are empty. Those are unmanned. They are not currently manned, and you are crazy if you think that these Russian troops that see Challenger 2s and CV-90s and M2 Bradleys, etc. coming over the horizon, you are crazy if you think that they're going to either hold the trench that they're in or get up and en masse in a coordinated effort move back 3, 4, or 5 kilometers to pass some Dragon's Teeth and hop into that next trench line that Prigozhin got money to dig with a tractor. Not going to happen. When they run, they're not going to stop running. So that's a little bit of a sidebar there, but that's the eggshell Russian defense that I believe exists today. So anyways, back to my original point. The Ukrainians cross rivers like they're going out of style. The Ukrainians shape the battlefield. They're playing 4D chess. They'll tell you that they're going left when they're going right. They'll tell you that it's square when it's a circle, etc. And to me, I think with the 20% rule, like I said, they're going to hold 20% of their troops back. I think another, we'll call it 40%, maybe 60%, are going to probe in between the well-fortified, well-staffed areas. They're not going to go strength on strength. They might try to slide between and around. They know Volodar's beaten down and has no confidence in themselves whatsoever, and their commander's just absolutely useless. He was replaced by another one that was absolutely useless. But still, hooking around behind Volodar and in between the two areas of strength, to me, would be the smartest thing that they could possibly do. And then last, with their last 20%, if I had to guess, I believe that the Ukrainians are going to surprise the world, and they're going to jump across a river or three. And I think they've got the riverine boats that can transport hundreds of people. They've already let themselves be seen on TV transporting Humvees across open waterways into the Kinburn Spit. And I think that there are enough bridges, they have enough bridge laying equipment, they have enough boats, they have enough confidence, and they have enough planning that they can cross anywhere from the Kinburn Spit all the way up to the southwest side of the nuclear plant. And I think anywhere along this front, you're going to be surprised, and you're going to see 2 to 4 brigades of Ukrainian troops led by special forces in the dead of the night, electronic warfare, Storm Shadow, HIMARS, etc. Get across, establish some large bridgeheads to the point where river crossings are safe. Then they're going to basically establish some very strong defensible bridges, and they're going to bring across the heavy equipment. And last but not least, another thing that's always kind of surprised me that a lot of military experts have said, including Ben Hodges, who I really, really like, and I agree with about 95% of what he's said as far as the military campaign has gone and what he'd like to see. Everybody seems to believe that the way that this is going to play out is that the Ukrainians are going to take their land, cut their land bridge, whichever way they're going to do it, and then eventually over the next year and a half, they're going to work their way down to Crimea after they cut the Kerch Bridge. They cut off any access. They turn it into an island. They shut off the water supply. And then they're basically going to slog their way through Crimea, letting all of these Russians turn tail and run to Crimea as the attack is happening. Or if you don't attack Melitopol, right? If you only go for Mariupol, then and you're not attacking anywhere across here, then you're basically every single troop, every single piece of equipment, every single man on the Russian military front in this area, you're basically saying, we're going to let you turn tail and run and fortify Crimea. Does that make sense to you? It doesn't make sense to me. So why people keep on saying that they're going to cut a land bridge and then they're going to basically work on Crimea over the next year and a half, if I'm the Ukrainian military, this is one of the best opportunities to catch the Russians flat-footed, immobile, dug in, stuck in trenches. And if you can send a substantial force around the backside, not only can you cut off their exit into Crimea, which I bet you they would have wish they had done in Kherson, you might actually start to make inroads into Crimea while those Russian troops are cut off and completely out of ammunition, water, food, supplies, beans, and bullets. So in my mind, somewhere along this front, the Ukrainians are going to take advantage of a weak spot, and they are going to pounce and, yes, cut the land bridge, but it's going to be between the areas of strength, make some of them run and make some of them quit. And I honestly believe that somewhere from the Kinburn Spit to the southwest portion of the nuclear plant, they are going to get across to the Dnipro River, quietly at first, loudly afterwards, and they are going to make the last thunder run of the military campaign straight for the Crimean Peninsula. They're going to cut off the water supply, they're going to cut off the exits, and some of that 20% reserve force that I talked about is going to follow them if it's successful. And you could actually see Crimea fall before you see Luhansk or Donetsk or anywhere else fall. You could see this fall first, and the mop-up exercises taking place up north because they caught everybody off guard. Ask yourself, does that fit the Ukrainian playbook, or does doing what everybody expects and what everybody believes is going to happen fit the playbook? To me, expect the unexpected. It could be something, doing a border run all the way around and trapping everybody. That's crazy. That would take so much manpower, so much logistics, whatever. But it's not out of the question. I think this is the Holy Grail, and this is going to be the surprise that's going to end the war a year faster than anybody else thought it was possible to end it. I may be wrong. Zelensky and Zaluzhny may fool everybody, and they may say, for the first time ever, we're going to do what's expected, and we're going to go strength on strength, mano on mano. We're going to make the land bridge, and then we're going to let the Russians run across the peninsula and off the Kerch before we take it down, and we'll let the Russians go across the border. I think they want as many POWs as possible. There are 20,000 Ukrainian children in Russia proper right now that they want back. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of Ukrainian soldiers that they want back, and they need bargaining chips and T-72s and TOS systems and S-300s that they capture are not going to get them Ukrainian children back. They're going to get those children back with bodies, with Russian soldiers. And the way to do that is to trap as many as possible, and the way to do that is to cut off as many exit points as possible, as fast as possible. So if I'm going to put my line in the sand and I'm going to say there's going to be a straight shot for Mariupol, and there's going to be a straight shot for the Crimean border, and they're going to trap everybody in between, and that is going to be the beginning of the end of this war. That is all I have. I hope my audio sounds a little bit better. I got a new headset. I'm going to be trying to post a little bit more. And I wanted to get this on record and in public. If I'm wrong, I want to pick myself apart afterwards, and if I'm right, I'll be very pleased that I am right. And because of the fact that I don't really have a ton of followers at the moment, I don't believe that the Russian MOD is going to be picking up on what I'm putting down. Anyways, have a great night, stay safe, kiss the ones you love, Slava Ukraini, and we'll talk soon.